Hello and welcome to this week's Code Review Weekly Workshop, everybody. We are on a very light agenda today, but a small question or something that caused me to think about it twice this week. I'm more than happy to share. So I've been reviewing this merge request. There's a lot of stuff going on, which not matter too much because I'm basically only interested in this very much thing. So I came across a couple of changes, like this MR includes some new UI elements, a new search, a lot of and it's pinging. Let me double check. It's making a call against an API which we are using at several places. So far, nothing to really worry about. Business as usual, kinda. When I was reading through, but when I was reviewing this, I was not the biggest fan of seeing this, which kind of is a magic number to me. And the according comment says, note, currently the API doesn't handle the strings of length smaller than 3, returning an empty list as a result of such searches. So here we substitute short search term with empty string to simulate default fetch all behavior. And that is kind of what I'm at. Like when I initially read this, I wasn't too happy about it. Like my initial thought was like, okay, if I would in whatever, how many days from now would go through this comment would, like I would be having issues basically understanding what's going on here. Like what kind of API, why we are not doing this thing, why smaller than 3, questions like this. So basically that was my initial comment. We could argue if this should have been blocking or not, but basically my initial take was, yeah, well, the smaller than 3, is that supposed to be a bug or a feature? Like what's actually going on? And I basically asked for some documentation. And here is where I might have been a little light, like what the author was saying, like, great question. He created a follow-up issue, not linking to it from the code comment, as I'm not sure if it is easily fixable, as the API we use here seems to be reused across the product. So I'm waiting for backend feedback in that issue to clarify if we can fix it. That sounded absolutely fine by me. What I really loved about it was like there was effort going on, and we actually raised something here or digged into it, and the follow-up issue looks pretty in-depth and great, and we will benefit from this. I'm pretty sure about this. What I thought about before I fell asleep was like, should I really have approved this? Like at the end of the day, the result, there is still quite a questionable comment in our code base introduced by now. This kind of got me.
I'm picturing you just like laying in bed at night, staring at the ceiling. Maybe I shouldn't have approved that MR.
Maybe the comment's just not good enough.
You gotta let go, Yannick. You gotta let it go.
Mostly.
That's so funny. I from what I'm viewing, like here's a good question. This is a good question. Thanks for bringing it up. There's so much to talk about. Just in general. This, when are you gonna block an MR because of a comment? And especially if you look at the previous comment, this comment is miles ahead more helpful than the previous comment.
Fair point.
So yeah, there might be more we can improve here of describing it, especially if there's a follow-up issue and all of that. But for me, this meets the, yeah, we're at an improvement here. So I think it was fine, and especially to label as non-blocking, and that behavior of, hey, here's a non-blocking question, and someone then took thought, didn't just ignore it. They took the opportunity to create a follow-up and to think about it. Like that's generally the culture I see, and that's fantastic. Of like, yeah, we're not going to block on this, but is there something we can improve here? And just to push back of like, I think the one of the reasons of keeping comments small is like you mentioned, well, okay, in the back end, what is this limitation? What's the context of this limitation? There's also a front end need to limit search by the first characters. Like I think there's also arguably this is also a UX requirement as well. Maybe. But it does seem, I agree. I really like that you saw 3. That's a magic number. I really like that. I think that's interesting. Yeah. There is I do have a question besides this comment, but I don't know. I would love to hear what Kasia, what you think of reviewing code comments and in this particular example, maybe.
I kind of agree with the fact that the comment that was there before and now like it was refactored to something a little bit more meaningful, and now it kind of makes a little bit more sense. But and with the person creating that card, like trying to dig into why, that's my understanding at least, that they created just to see like why it doesn't handle strings of length less than 3. Is that correct? So yeah. So that's all good, but yeah, I think that it like because of the comment, it kind of makes more sense. Although I do see the Y3 kind of thing. Maybe the link for that issue should have been added to this comment. Because then one day someone is gonna ask the same question and they might not be able to find the issue in the backend. Also to the issue in the backend, we might want to link it back to this MR saying, let's update this once something in the backend gets changed, so that it kind of links back together. Yeah, that's kind of all I can think of at the moment.
Yeah. I'm gonna rant just a little bit.
Go for it.
So this is the kind of housekeeping thing that I would just commit myself of, I would just throw a cross-reference to the issue here in this comment. This is also the kind of housekeeping thing that they should feel free to just add a commit to. But since our most recent process changes with reviews and commits, I can't be the maintainer for it anymore if I add a commit. And if they push any change, it resets all maintainer approvals. So I would not be surprised. I'm not saying that's what happened here, but yeah, adding something small, for some reason we've added, and in the name of one objective, we've inherited some unnecessary burdens that we need to address, which I think causes friction with, you know, very small house cleaning stuff, which can make a big deal, you know, 6 months from now when you're trying to actually understand this thing. Sorry, I had to rant about that. But yeah, I would love to add a cross references. I used to do that all the time. But now for the sake of efficiency, I kind of can't do that. But it's unfortunate. Yeah.
Yeah, I highly agree with the rant. I'm on the same side. Like I do see that this is not quite a binary thing, and the prior rules also had their downsides. Like maintainers had a lot of freedom, kind of, which arguably they probably shouldn't. But yet,
what's wrong with you, Yannick? Why are you turning your back on maintainers? I'm joking.
But yeah, like not being able to at least maybe throw in a suggestion and then immediately apply it yourself, like putting in a link into another comment or whatever it might be. This is arguably beneficial for our code base in the long run.
Yeah, and here's a really good question: is like, have we ever run into issues of maintainers doing too much? And what's the real risk of that? Do we not trust? If we can't trust maintainers, there's a lot more. There's a lot of damage you can't control there.
Fair point.
But if now
Sorry,
we
what
have,
do you mean that for? Like, why can't we trust maintainers? Because
no,
like, what do you mean?
oh,
Sorry.
you're asking such good questions. All right. No, well, so for some compliance reasons, we've needed a way to create a easily auditable trail that there were no unauthorized, unreviewed changes that went into an MR. And so previously, maintainers used to be able to push small commits, maybe even just get a pipeline passing that was all backstage and didn't like, we'd be able to do that before approving and merging.
Mhm.
But if someone is searching for, you know, hey, MRs that were approved that also had, you would get a set of MRs that would be flagged as questionable, of like, oh, was someone trying to sneak something in? So it's like, from our customer's perspective, that are really highly secure sensitive, there's this audit trail that we're wanting. So I think that's a hard problem to solve, but the cost, here's the main message as I see it. We had to solve this problem quickly, so we whacked it with the big hammer, and we have inherited some burdens which are not related to the problem, and our efficiency burdens we now need to address in different ways. And what's challenging is, I think a lot of those burdens are interpreted as part of the compliance, which I don't think is the case. We've applied some rules to help us make an easily audible trail for these MRs, but there's some efficiency burdens we need to identify that may not necessarily fit in the requirements of the audit trail thing. But so it's not that we don't trust maintainers, it's just this is a side effect of some process stuff we've had to inherit.
But I guess like there I am assuming that there is a reason for developers at GitLab not being able to merge their own code, right? The reason is, let's be super safe and let's be super careful. And so if you're a maintainer, you have a little bit more rights, or actually you have the right to merge, but it shouldn't be your own code. And that's still like the thing about us being super secure kicks in again. Please don't merge your own code. Like, why wouldn't we just say to the author of the MR, say, hey dude, this and that, can you just make this change and I'll be able to approve this?
Yeah. And I think that's fine. Oh man, I offended Yannick severely.
Completely.
I know. I think that's fine. I think it would be and that's I think that's what we're inheriting. But what used to take like, oh, this MR is good, I'm just going to add a cross reference to an issue. I'd be
Okay.
able to resolve that in 5 minutes, but now it's going to take a day.
Yeah.
And that's friction that
Yeah.
people feel and hesitate to bring things up. That's a hypothesis of, do we do as much housekeeping on these MRs that are just small little things that maybe pay off in the overall understanding? Do we do as much housekeeping now that there's added friction there? And you know, and then compound, if an MR takes a day, compound on top of that broken master, maybe it takes 2 days now. And so that friction, I think, creates a culture of, we're not as motivated to make these very small changes on top of things, which I feel like just those small little steps in the right direction though can make a big difference. So I feel like these are efficiency things, that these are problems to solve. I'm not there's what I believe is that we can solve these efficiency process issues and be compliant. We just can't couple. It's really easy when compliance comes up to couple all the inefficiencies as like, oh, well, we have to be inefficient in the name of compliance. And I think if we really know what the requirement is here, we can meet this while addressing the efficiency issues. It's just going to probably, and that's what, there's some work being done to already improve like code owners in a way such that some of those side effects aren't as burdensome. But you bring up what you said is 100% the approach that we tend to take. But I do find myself hesitating too, of like, I don't want to block this for another day. I want to just go ahead and merge it.
Why does it take a day to add a comment?
Yeah, that's a great question. You would hope it doesn't. A lot of that has to do, if I'm reviewing something at the end of my day and the author is, in the time zone later, it's like, yeah, I'll leave a comment. They're off the clock. They'll pick it up the next day, and then I'll review it then again 24 hours from when I started. So I think a lot of that has to do with our distributed nature of when that happens. But I don't know, maybe we should just create, maybe if I was gonna create maybe I need to just create more MRs. If it's like, I'm gonna merge this, maybe I should just create an MR to say like, here, I'm going to merge it, but I'm just going to add these comments and just create a new MR for it. I mean, that still is a level of friction above what was there, but maybe that's the most efficient thing. Clearly, I'm this old person that doesn't like change, and I get upset when I don't get to.
I've got an idea to properly over-engineer this. So I'm sorry if this was mentioned while I was gone, but everything was right what I just heard, but from the terms of the rules we applied, the whole maintainer thingy and the approvals, that was to me that not just to me, that was only a side effect. Like before we had that rule in place, there was actually a serious problem going on in my eyes. And that would be like, you would be able, any author would be able to still add commits while the thing was already, and the approvals would be persistent from reviewers or maintainers. And I personally had this in the past quite a while, quite often, where like I've been reviewing a large MR, approved it, basically version 1 of it, kind of. Maybe UX review wasn't done yet. UX review came in, discussions have been happening, they kind of re-architectured the whole thing. Nothing was like it used to be. It still had my approval on there. So that is definitely a problem where I'd be like, okay, there's some room for improvement there. And yeah, as you mentioned, we kind of solved that with the big camera. Here's my over-engineering idea. How do we feel about allowing commits that only add comments? Like if there's executable code in there, we're not having them. But if it's only comments, like that would be a pain to set up. And maybe you can still cheat the system. But in theory, on the first glance, it kind of makes sense. Probably even a bigger hammer there.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I don't know. I feel like for me, and there might be little things like that. Like we're already talking about, like, would we be able to just let maintainers add rebase commits? Like, so right now that would disqualify a maintainer from maintaining the MR is if they rebased the MR.
Really?
Yeah. So it's like, it's that level of like, okay, we had to do this. And so we've way overcompensated. And now we got to kind of figure out going back to solving some of these inefficiencies. Even if they did the rebase quick action, which, man, that's so frustrating. So now I don't rebase at all. I try to just keep rerunning the pipeline.
Which is kind of another risk, actually.
I don't know. The pipelines are merged results, so I don't know. But here's a feature I would really like. This is interesting. So Yeah, that's a hard problem of like allowing commits that were only comments or something. That's a hard problem. I would like this create a follow-up MR button on an MR. I'd like to be able to create a follow-up MR that's like based on top of that branch or something. Real quick. That would be really cool. Kind of like there's the create a follow-up issue, or from a issue, there's a create a merge request button. I think I would like a create a merge request from a merge request button.
But then you're gonna have to go through the reviewing process again, and that will take time. So
if it's just comments, that's a really good point. But if it is just comments and just backstage stuff, sometimes you can go just straight to the maintainer, and the maintainer's like, oh yeah, this is good, let's just go. So it's like, and it would be a different person, so we can kind of take advantage of some of the parallelization of all the heads. So yeah, it's definitely less efficient than me just pushing it up of like, this is very clear, the one thing that needs to happen, let me just do this before I merge. It's very it's still more inefficient than that, but maybe it's better if we can make that easier. It's better than not doing it at all.
Question of understanding here. Like for a second, let's imagine Kasha will be open up in MR and I'll be the maintainer to it. And MR is absolutely looking fabulous, but there's this one comment I really want to add. So I'd be using that feature, like open up a follow-up MR, adding the comment, and I'll assign it to you to review code. You're a big fan of the comment, just approved a couple of minutes ago. Kasha's MR is still open because not all the reviews are fully in place. Where do we merge it now? We would merge it into the initial, into Kasha branch, correctly? Not into default, because the thing like changes are not even there.
We're engineering this feature already.
Like, what's the target branch of the follow-up? That's my question.
Then that would disqualify you from approving the MR because you got a merge commit in there. So kind of, that's a good point. I was not anticipating that workflow. I was anticipating the MR got merged, the first M1, and then the other one got rebased and retargeted automatically, and then that got merged. So I was kind of anticipating that.
One more question about that. Like if someone is like created this feature and is trying to get it added, and if someone jumps in and say, I mean, a maintainer, but jumps in and adds some comments and things like that, and the author is not fully happy about the comment, it like maybe they feel a little bit like it's been their piece of work, and you know they would be happy to add that comment if they were given a chance. I don't know if anyone would feel that way, but also it goes also for like changing the code. Like, would people be happy for other people to just change their code while they're like maintaining, thinking, oh, this is probably the way it's supposed to be, but maybe they don't have the full understanding because they haven't been working from the beginning to the very end on this particular piece of code. I'm not sure about this whole thing, but yeah, like how would we go about that particular aspect?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yannick, do you have any thoughts on that?
Not so much at the beginning.
So this is where our values come in of having very short toes and highly valuing efficiency. So it's like we've really tried to create a culture of, no, I don't just treat this as myself. Everything's in draft. We should all feel collaborative on top of it. And so that's one of the things I really loved about that. People push, like I loved it anytime I saw it of someone push to my branch, or like that just felt like we are being so much more efficient on this. And if I had any doubt in my mind that maybe they wouldn't like this, and then I would, and we would talk about it. But if it's like so clear this is gonna help, I'm like pretty 90% certain this is helpful. then I'll just go for it. And so I can understand some organizations that are a little more, I don't know, would be a little more sensitive to that. But that's one of the things that makes GitLab really special is our collaborative and efficiency values, where we shouldn't shy away from just jumping in and throwing stuff at something. Except now we should, because we would be inefficient to do so, which is that's why you sense so much friction in my voice, because this is one of the things I felt like was a great example of our GitLab values that that we've not quite been able to resurrect after making certain changes. My daughter snuck in here and asked for some water, and I would feel like a really bad parent if I didn't give her some water. So I'm gonna step away for 2 minutes and do that. I do have a question about your MR, Yannick. So when I come back, there's something unrelated to the comments I have a question about. So maybe I am gonna keep you up at night of like, maybe should I have approved it? It wasn't the comment.
Okay, go for it. Yeah, that leaves me a little anxious, but that's all right. So, what else to cover? What about you last week in reviewing things, Kasia? Was there anything worth exploring? Anything you'd like to chat about?
I actually, like, I haven't been reviewing people's work yet.
Okay.
I haven't been pinged on anything. I think it kind of comes after a few months, I think.
Oh, so you just started at GitLab and you're not listed as reviewer yet? Okay.
Yes. So that's why I never bring anything, because I don't really have anything unless it's my own work.
Gotcha.
So yeah, but just on that note of like the maintainer thing, I think it probably should come down to priority level. Because if something is of a high priority and has to go in ASAP, and you are the maintainer and you want to add a comment, but you know, if I add a comment, it will cause another like day of back and forward. But because there is a high level of priority on this, and so it must go in ASAP, then maybe they should be allowed to interfere with the
understood
code.
Yeah, completely understood. That would be probably another very complex rule to apply. But let me give you this, how this is actually done in the real world, kind of. If there is really something highest priority, very high attention, we need to get this done, then you would be looking for somebody to help you out within your time zone. Like that is kind of what Slack is for. Then it really would be, okay, important thing here going on, corresponding maintainer is on PTO, sleeping, whatever, not available. Can somebody else take over here? That is kind of any reword, or maybe even that might be even a good opportunity for a sync. Like if it's super urgent, is anybody available to hop on a call with me and get it sorted out really quick, because we need in this case.
I guess there are different levels of priority. I think what you just described was a very high priority. I was kind of meaning more of a like, let's get this merged today. This is not breaking for anybody, but let's like, it has a higher priority than just like a maintenance task or something like that.
Gotcha.
So in those cases, I would say maintainer should be able to like interfere and add a comment or whatever, rebase.
Yeah.
But otherwise, if it's something that can wait to the next day, then maybe not. I'm not sure. I guess that also opens the question of if it's a priority and the maintainer does something and then it jeopardizes the actual work and outcome, then we're back to square one. They shouldn't have done it. So yeah, okay.
Yeah, no,
how difficult this is to like figure out.
But I do think at the sorry, Yannick, what were you gonna say?
No, just to add on, the only reason why I was laughing, like this priority, where it's not really high priority, but it would be great to have it in today. That is basically what we're saying at the end of every milestone over and over again. And this is where maintainers are really losing, I wouldn't say they're losing their productivity, but where they focus on getting those things off the table a lot. So it's definitely a real world problem, that's for sure.
Can you share your MR, Yannick?
Yep. There was a line maybe. Here we go. Yeah. Click on the right buttons. Desktop 2. Here we are.
Okay. One thing I observed is that if you go ahead and collapse your comment, what's funny here is we're adding a comment about the 3. But we actually change the behavior a bit. And it's interesting to note that there's no comment by the actual behavior of the thing. As being a front-end engineer, when I see this, I'm like, okay, we're changing some state. For some reason, we got some state come in, but we went ahead and just emptied out this state. And if we had a component that had like a V model on this, I don't see how the user is ever getting past 3 characters. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah. Because you might press one key, it would just reset it, and you might press another, and yep.
So my question is, do we have what uses search term? That's my big question.
How do I best do this?
You can hit the 3 sushi rolls at the top right.
3 sushi rolls. Oh yeah, absolutely. That was easy. You fast, Yep, it's already merged, so obviously, yeah, absolutely. Okay.
This is probably triggered by like a search button, right? It's not triggered by just input, hopefully.
That's a great question. So is that search term? Okay. So we don't use it. Oh, that's very interesting. And so what calls on search?
On filter.
Yes. So that is just triggered by a button.
Yep.
That's very interesting. But a V model, so that would be a V model thing wouldn't work here, which is if I had just input and I was typing into it, which is,
you know why I did not came up with that question or not even ask myself? Because I remember checking this branch out and actually testing it out. So therefore, I was like, okay, it does work with an input less than, But I'm with you. We would like with some type along thingy, we would be running into issues here.
Yeah, there's one more interesting quirk in behavior of how the previous and the new are not functionally equivalent. If you go back to the MR, this is not worth a comment at all. This is just the kind of, I like solving puzzles. This is that level of not valuable to anything at all. But previous behavior, if I had a length greater than 3, but then was backspacing back, we don't update the search term. So it would use my previously long search. But now if I had a length greater than 3 and then backspace back and re-entered, we reset to empty, which is just an interesting change in behavior, which is not worth a comment. Like, so.
Gotcha.
Because it's probably more desirable. But it's like if I wrote Apple and press enter and then backspace back to A, previously it would search again on Apple. But in this case, it would just search on empty.
Gotcha. Strong opinion on this. You know how I kind of feel about this? I feel like this logic actually belongs in the backend. Like what the behavior we're trying to achieve here is like we are filtering a list, and if the filter query is less than 3 characters, you just want to give the whole list because like that really doesn't matter. I personally don't really see a point where we should bother with this in the front end. So in the backend, I'd say if we're throwing an empty string or 1 character at it, I would expect it just to return the full list once more. which might be performance-wise not the greatest, but the user has kind of like asked for the filter.
Yeah, I'm gonna push back a little bit, but I'm going to call your concern, but I'm gonna raise you a bigger concern. What's gonna happen if the user searches AI?
Yeah, we're gonna be doing a fetch with an empty string.
It's gonna be like they didn't search for anything. It's gonna look broken.
Fair point. Yeah.
The previous behavior of actually just showing an empty list is potentially better. Like when it says currently API doesn't handle strings of length less than 3. From a UX perspective, that's actually probably better because the user puts some sort of information there. And if we're not filtering on it, the best situation would be we could tell them, hey, we can't handle search strings less than 3 characters. So if we could warn the user of that somehow, that would be the best. But this behind the scenes where we just treat it like a fetch for everything and we just ignore the search, I think could be confusing to users and make it look like it doesn't work.
There was, yeah, I partially understood. Like maybe I'm getting something wrong, but if I look at this condition and this condition, and I imagine that somebody would be putting the string AI into this, like this behavior is the same to me. Like, haven't changed it in a logical way, has it? Because like AI would still, oh, okay, we've been adding the reset. Like this is what's new. Like the actually setting empty string in there. Okay, what would have happened on the old implementation? There was just there wouldn't have even been a call to the API, correct? Most likely.
Well, no, that all that behavior is the same. So what even the previous behavior, what we've done, we haven't made this change, but previously, I don't think we want to replace. If we secretively is not the right word, but if we behind the scenes replace user input, that's kind of a UX red flag of somehow we need to tell the user their input is being ignored. Otherwise it'll be confusing. Yeah.
Shouldn't there be some kind of validation of the input field?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds great. That would be a great approach. And so these are all, I would ask a UX question here. But bringing it all back full circle, I do think, hey, this method is questionable from a UX perspective. But what triggered that question was some of the code was sticking out to you, like this magic number, the comment to it, like all of those like feelings you get with the method. Sometimes if you keep pulling at the string, like real issues come up. And for me, I do think, okay, there's actually a UX issue here. We need to somehow the user if they're not.
Okay. I think I just like what I just did was to open up the follow-up issue that was luckily created. Maybe I'm repeating what you just said, but I just fully understood this UX issue, and it definitely does occur. Like the API would return an empty list in this case if we are providing it with a string less than 3 characters. Like that's quite wow. Like I would get full list, but empty list is just not great. And especially like on an empty string, you would provide me a full list. On 1 character string, I would get an empty list. That doesn't like that doesn't feel great from a UX perspective.
Yeah, to me, it just sounds like the API is not giving enough information. It would be great if we can't do something. That needs to be part of our response of, I didn't run this thing, so we need to, and here's why. Here's a message you can give to the user.
I have a question about the process here a little bit. So somebody have created this MR and posted it for review and whatnot. Would they need to have a UXer to like approval on changing this feature in that way before this MR was even created?
Fantastic question. Shall I, or do you want to go for it, Paul?
Yeah, so it should be UX reviewed. And I think it is. Is it?
Yep. Yeah. Let me double check, but yeah.
And
I guess that's all good.
Well, there's UX are really good. The way I see, obviously it's hard to put all the individuals under a bucket, but they're kind of the requirements owners. They're really good at knowing what the requirements should be. But we as engineers get to see the code. And so we can see a lot more potential behavior that they can't see. And so they'll review an MR, but they're doing the black box testing. If they're not looking at the code, they're just looking through it of what we expect it to be. And they may not test that case because that wasn't in their thoughts of the requirements that we're going to test here. So as an engineer, I often find UX questions from the code. I look at the code, I'm like, okay, here's a behavior I don't think we're considering. And I'll even say, here's a potential user reaction to this. And so there's a lot of collaboration between engineering and UX, and it's not necessarily like separate departments that need this separate approval thing. We're all trying to implement UX. So I think we all contribute to reviewing and collaborating on that discussion. So I wouldn't say if I see something and I know I would be confused as a user, but it's UX approved, I would, I'll bring it up. Even though it's approved.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I highly do agree that this is super hard to find for any UX reviewer. That being one thing, and another thing, it might actually be arguable out of scope for this MR because the API didn't change, the way we work with it didn't really change. It was basically about a couple of UI elements that changed.
Totally.
So
yes.
Therefore,
very much out of scope this MR. Yeah.
There would probably be another MR to be speaking of. But yeah, I have, like, don't get me wrong, but I have, and that's kind of the thing. UX reviews are not always required. And if I imagine an MR that would actually be working on the API and the results of it, I could see that this is one of those MR that goes through without anybody from UX looking over it. Because it's just JSON, So that might be a gap we're looking at here.
So are we saying that the UX specialists look at code and they approve MRs? Is that how? Because you said that
they look at screenshots and they'll test it out. They'll use the code to figure out how to test it out, but they kind of use it from just the user's perspective. But they're not expected to know all the intricacies of code. It's fine. Because I think they're really great at owning requirements. But we as code experts often can see threads of how certain functions relate to the requirements, which the requirement owners may not be aware of these facets that we need to bring up questions. And that's the feedback, it's just the feedback cycle in play here, which is cool.
Question on this. Is anybody aware where we draw the line? Like, I definitely know that there is MRs out there who do not qualify or don't need a UX review. How do we actually make
I
this
think it's in our
distinction?
guidelines that any user-facing change needs a UX review. I'm pretty sure that's in our guideline.
Okay, so an API change in theory definitely should require one.
If it's changing types that would change something significant on the user-facing land, I think so. But if it's just
super under the hood,
values,
yeah,
I wouldn't expect so. But yeah, that's a good question.
Gotcha.
We're at time. Well, I know for an agendaless meeting, there's a lot to talk about.
Absolutely, a lot of insights. Thanks so much
thanks for joining,
everybody.
Pasiel. Thanks for joining, Yannick. I'll catch you all later. Bye.
See you next week.